Here to everybody. Thanks for joining here. I do see a new name, Jennifer Smith. Did you just want to introduce yourself?
Yep. Good morning, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm at home today. So Jennifer Smith, one of the managers of clinical informatics working at Transform Shared Service Organization, Southwestern Ontario. We support a lot of the HIS there. So nice to meet you, everyone.
Good to meet you as well. Thanks for joining. We're
nice to meet
obviously
you.
Very familiar with Transform, so thanks for representing them today. Great. Well, since our last meeting in November, I know we hit the holidays. A lot of people sort of start to slow down then, so I didn't really have a huge agenda on anything that I wanted to specifically cover. I didn't get any topics from folks, and really we didn't have a whole lot of specific agenda items for sitting on future meetings. But I did want to just kind of open it up to folks. If you've got new projects that are kicking off you want to talk about, maybe get some feedback from others, or if you have new projects or workflows that are under consideration, it'd be great to be able to kind of understand that to the group and then get some feedback as well. So maybe I'll open it up with that, and then we can go into other areas as well.
I got a question.
Sure.
This is Brian at University of Tennessee Medical Center in Knoxville. We use the Dynamap for our vital signs on acute care. And I was wondering if anybody else is also using the GE VC150 and have connected those wirelessly to get your vitals into PowerChart via Vitals Link.
We implemented it last year. This is Tina from CAMC in Charleston, West Virginia.
So we are in the stages of trying to connect one device to validate and test, and we keep getting error saying cannot connect to remote server. We've got Cerner involved, we got GE involved, and this has dragged its feet through the holidays, and I've got 94 devices sitting over in receiving, and I got to get them out and get them working. So I wondered, did y'all run into the issue that came up initially was with the certificate, downloading and installing the certificate on the device, but then Cerner comes back and tells me the Vitals Link server wasn't set up correctly. So I didn't know if you ran into any of those issues or if yours just worked great and we're just out of luck.
I don't recall us having certificate issues. We started our project of deployment. We started out in our 4 EDs first because they were in need of it quickly. And it took us roughly 8 weeks. I don't remember us having a whole lot of issues getting it installed. It actually went smoother than what I remember, than what we had anticipated. We anticipated a lot of roadblocks because we always have them. We never get by without having tons of barriers. But the biggest issue that we had was the documentation pieces in the background. I don't know if you're going to be using that for anything. Not everybody uses those VC150s to capture documentation, but we chose to do it, and that's what most of our delay was to getting it out quickly, because we had to map those to we chose pain fields, caregiver rounding, things like that our reassessment nurses and our nursing assistants would do when they're in there, so they wouldn't have to bring in another device.
Yeah,
That's
we're
awesome.
weighing that as we go, but we wanted to keep it simple up front. We didn't want to put too much custom fields in there for us to map and for them to enter. But right now we're just stuck on the connectivity piece. So do you remember if you require them to sign into the VC150 or they scan their badge to identify?
They're scanning their badges.
Okay.
There's ups and downs to scanning your badges and people having to, they always have the ability to sign in, but the groups, all of the nursing staff wanted to be able to scan their badges versus having to log in and out.
I may email you and copy my, forgot his title, but his name's Roosevelt. He's helping us with our iBus, and if maybe bounce something off y'all and just to see. It's a sidebar from this, so I won't take.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure our team would be glad to share with you how they got it going and the other barriers that they encountered.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll be glad to. Shoot me an email and I'll connect you with our folks.
Thank you so much, team.
You're welcome.
Right, thanks for getting us kicked off there, Brant. So you're not even able to get the Vitals link connected. I mean, I think using badges is sort of like step 2. You're just not even seeing them at this point.
Getting to use the badges was not easy. That was one of the lengthiest things because we use global GHR, and having to do the provisioning for that was pretty extensive. For all of your staff to be able to, because that's individual. It's not like you can just flow it into the application. They had to get all that information from our HR department and then get it connected to it. Somebody else might be able to find a better way to have done that. That's how we ended up having to do it.
Roosevelt said he thinks one of our people are going to have to get that information and put it into every individual user's HNA user profile.
Yes.
So it's a lot of work, but I think it's got to be done. And then as new people are onboarded, it's got to be part of the onboarding process, so we don't have to go back and do it over for all new hires. So
yes, that's what we did. As soon as somebody on the onboarding, when they're getting their Cerner access, that's part of it. You're correct.
Yeah. And we do it because we use something different for our blood sugars and our point of care devices. They're able to scan their badges and all that information is already there, but that's a different system than Cerner.
Yes. And it would be nice if there was a way to interface the provisioning in the background. You are correct. But you know what, when you deploy it, go out on the floors and watch the nurses use it. It was the look on their face to push a button. It was more angst because they didn't believe it made it to the record, but then we'd show them it was there. And it was like, I really just have to push a button. That look was priceless.
It's worth it.
And I had not thought about taking pictures of it, but I just didn't realize in the time, like we monitored the time because our reassessment nurses during COVID, they were drowning in the ERs and they were having to take the vital sign machine as well as a mobile cart to do documentation for both of them. At some points when we had 40, 50 patients in our ERs, we had to have 2 nurses out there and one was transcribing while the other, and their eyes were all over the place. Them being able to push that button, they were able to manage the patient so much better. So it is unreal. It's a lot of work in the background, but to see the smiles on their face was just something you can't beat.
Awesome. That's what we're hoping for.
Right. Well, Tina, thanks
Hi,
for.
this is Simi. I'm sorry. I joined the conversation a little late, and it sounds like I just wanted to get clarity on what the workflow was that you were discussing. It sounds like it's a vital sign BMDI interface with your systems that go directly to auto documentation in this electronic medical record. Can I just see clarification? Can we use BMDI interface in acute and critical care areas, but we don't use it in our ED? And so just for my clarity, are you using it on mobile vital sign machines, not ones that are tethered to the walls? And so it's a wireless interface for the BMDI?
Yeah, but it's different than BMDI from the bedside monitor.
Yeah.
That data has to be validated by the nurse. When the vitals come from the VC150 wireless GE Dynamap, they come through Vitals Link and they come in as validated data and assign data into the patient's record because they create the established connection from the person taking the vitals, when we talk about scanning the badges or signing into the device, and then you scan the patient's armband to create that connection. And then when you hit send, it sends it right into the patient's vital signs section in iView as validated data.
So then, just for my awareness, because we're not that far down a path yet, but we're looking at it, if I take that blood pressure and it turns out that patient's moving around, it's kind of, I don't trust it. I don't hit the button, it doesn't send.
That's
I retake.
correct.
So that's my
correct.
validation step, is that accepts.
Yeah, you have
Cool.
to get, it's not easy. I mean, it's not just like you can accidentally hit it. You got to pull up that screen, kind of do a review. There's where you can enter other things like respirations, position. There's 20 actually fields you could build and we have them do a lot of documentation. We're not trying to go down that road, but trying to keep it simple. But you have to do all that and then hit send. And the other scenarios you may want to do like Q15 times 4, Q30 times 2.
Mhm.
You could come back, pull all those up, review them, and then hit send, and all those go into the record.
That's good to know. Thank you. We're looking at a different device, so I have to look into how that works. But I know that was a question for some of our leaders of, are we sending garbage data over?
Yeah.
If you did, you could modify it within iView, but you clinician and education on the front end is validate prior to hitting the button, because once you hit the button, it actually is part of the medical record.
And are you doing this only in your assessment triage area, or are you doing it in all of the ED beds as well?
I think that's for you, Tina.
So for us, we have the BMDI, that's in the back in the ED proper area.
Okay.
So we have all that association back there, but we're using the VC150s in the triage area as well. So we have to have reassessment nurses because we're still overloaded in our ERs. So it's being used in the triage as well as the rounding in the triage areas.
And our plan is to have it be used in the triage in our ED as needed, and spot checking if they don't have a bedside monitor in the ED, and then all of our acute care areas.
Yes.
As well as our Cancer Institute is wanting to come on board as well. So when they're doing their chemo infusions, to be able to set that, to take the vitals on an interval and just come through and validate and send right across. So.
Okay, we already have the BMDI Association in infusion centers as well. So now, just really quickly, we use Philips monitors here, not GEs. I'm assuming you use like an Imprivata, like a tap and go kind of for the ID badge to scan in. It is the device for the vital signs have how are they entering data in? Is it like a computer
Touch
screen?
Yeah,
It's a touch screen.
actually,
Thank you.
Let's see.
It is. It's very sensitive. We had to actually buy, if you're a woman that's got really kind of nice long nails, you can tap it. If you have very short nails, you too easily fat finger stuff. So we have styluses that hang off of the machine. We also, all of our nurses we provided in our EDs, provided them the pins with the push in the front of it so that they could tap in, because we use the documentation as well, and you have to manually select your selections, your nomenclatures that are in there. You have to tap those, and they found that was easier to use a stylus or use one of the pins that's got the little rubbery thing on the front of it. I forgot the technical for it.
Yeah, it's a touch screen in comparison. It's loading up. It was off, but this is my love-hate relationship trying to get this thing connected. If you can see, it's kind of got a glare, it looks like, but as it's loading, but it comes with the scanner, so they scan their badge. That's how they identify themselves, but technically they could log in on the screen, but as she's saying, sometimes depending on your fingertips or your fingers, touch screens are a little, sometimes there's an easier way, like she said, using a stylus makes it a lot quicker. But basically, it takes, your typical set of vitals, and then you can add questions that may keep the clinician from just using this as a one-stop shop versus having to have this and a laptop on wheels or something like that. And so we're close, but we're not there yet as far as getting ours connected.
The staff seemed to really like it. I don't know if we did a vendor fair when we picked it. We picked GE because they were we needed them right away. You know, looking back, Massimo might have been a better choice. I'm not sure. But for the purposes that we're using it for in an acute care, even on our floors, the nurses, the nursing assistants really appreciate the fact that we added the documentation for caregiver rounding. It's in there as well. So they didn't have to bring in two. It's tricky though, because when you think about, you know, the way you've always done vital signs, you calculate you watch them breathe. You have to go to another screen to enter in the respirations because it doesn't capture it. In the beginning, people were forgetting to do it because they were so excited they got this button to push and it sends it. They forgot to do the respirations to add it to it because you do have to change screens. It's not entered right on the screen that is viewable.
So I know that's one of the education points for us, but what they do gain is the automation of the temperature, whereas before,
yes,
they always had to manually enter the temperature regardless of which way they did it. So yeah, so I think it'll be a learning curve for us, but like you said, in the end, those smiles will probably be what's worth it.
Great. Well, I think that was a great conversation. Appreciate everybody's sort of input on that. Any other projects that folks are working on we want to continue to talk about? New projects, questions, concerns?
I have a topic if I can jump in, Brian.
Sure, Holly.
So we are in the process of, we're not currently capturing administrative and birth, sex, and gender preference in a way that's like according to Cerner's model standard. And just interested in if folks have implemented that fully, and by fully I mean, have you also taken into consideration the impact to the lab and pharmacy, depending on if a patient's going through a transition, for example. And just organizationally, I think we are in need of a lot of communication and education around how to capture the information, what to do with the information. And so I think there's a push to get the IT changes in place, but all of the other components to that project kind of operationally have not really been thought out, so we're working through those now. But just interested if how you've handled that at your organization, and has it been kind of coupled with the human resource education components as well?
So we just had a meeting yesterday about that. For CAMC, the administrative sex was already built before birth sex was added. So our mapping to everything for administrative sex, which is not being used now for the model content, that's more like your legal sex. The administrative sex is now. So that's where we were running into problems. And we did find on the wiki where there is a custom script that can be built to go retrospect all of that. We just found that yesterday. That's what we were looking for, because it was all recognized, of course, after the fact. We put in some gender identity icons in there, the birth sex, we put this in, and it's like, oh, well, do you all realize that you had this, which we really didn't look at as closely as we should have? So we have the gender identity with the icons when registration marks what the patient says they identify with, if they tell them. We're looking at trying to change some of that with having the clinicians have an alert go to the clinicians. That's really a much more private conversation than what a registrar should have to do. but that's what we're looking at. We also implemented the gender identity that the nurses from the social or MAs from the social history component will populate that information over there. That is on there. We did not implement the two-way where you can change it right from the icon. We did not implement that. We chose for right now just for it to flow into when the social history component is completed. We are looking to change that when we have a better process. Right now, our process is mucky, and we're trying to clean it up when we recognized the lab results were not coming in correctly on patients that are identifying themselves as another sex. It's not going the right place because of the original layout from Cerner.
Okay. So we are capturing administrative and birth sex now. We do capture gender preference in the social history, but the issue there is it's not really visible unless you go digging for it. And we are having similar conversations around if a patient presents at a registration area and wants to share that information, how do we get that information in the system? Because the challenge, I think, with handing it off to a clinician is then it's going to get kind of passed off and forgotten.
Right.
And, you know, especially to a busy ED nurse who's running around doing, 100 other things. So it's definitely an interesting topic with many layers. I just, we don't have, we're kind of starting from scratch with the education and really, training not just clinicians but registrars and everyone, how to capture the information, what conversations to have, what questions to ask. So do you have any policies that you have in place at your organization that you should, not just from a systems perspective, but use for training on the topic in general?
So no, that's the other piece, is that we're building the policy and taking the definitions, the Cerner recommendations for those definitions to add it to it. Where we are not mapped correctly, we're basically at square one of having to revamp and redo the entire workflow. Because we wanted to, as well as do room assignments based on the questions, whether the registrar or the clinician answers.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, if anybody else has a fully functional gender identity process, I'm sure Holly and I both would love to have your information.
I was just gonna say, we just went live with Cerner about 2 years ago now, and it's a process that we're still working through. We're currently just capturing birth, sex, and then gender within the registration conversation, or wherever it's most appropriate, right, where the patient feels most comfortable to disclose. The organizations that we support, their kind of driving priority right now is more actually capturing the preferred name and the preferred gender on places that are visible to the clinicians or people that are going to be reaching out to that patient. So the work that we've done is really just some CCL scripting to include in the armband the preferred name, the preferred gender, and right now as well looking at the banner bar to just kind of get some of those things highlighted. A lot of the procedures and policies aren't in place yet at all of our organizations. And I think that's half the struggle, is getting people aware and getting those processes, just like you lady spoke to, in place so that people feel comfortable to have those conversations. Bed accommodations right now, we're kind of doing an extra safety step measure where there's a phone call if it's a specific accommodation required to our command center, that we call it, for bed allocation, or using comments within capacity management in our Cerner application. So haven't fully implemented anything yet, but slowly kind of just starting to take steps, I guess, to a more inclusive version of our EMR, but not much else to share besides that.
Yeah, I was just digging around here on the side. We definitely capture birth and administrative. If I click in the banner bar, they pop up along with gender identity if it's entered. I have not found one where anyone's documented gender identity, but I also haven't found anyone with, anything beyond administrative and birth matching. I couldn't find any sort of policies though. And I don't know the workflow on who's entering, how they're entering. So I'm basically, not very helpful, but it does exist in our system.
Yeah. Thank you.
We labeled
Yeah.
ours birth sex and current sex. And that's what shows in the banner bar. It says
Okay.
birth sex and current sex. And if there is a mismatch between the two, we have a rule that sends a notification, and I believe to patient, either a patient placement to get a hold of the attending. We have something in the background when there's a mismatch between what the birth sex says and the current sex, so that clinically, because there's some lab values and things that would not be correct or need to be adjusted based off of if there's a difference between those two. I'm drawing a blank on as to what they were exactly, but I do know that's what we implemented. And the concern from our clinical team was when there was a mismatch, that someone was be alerted to validate and or then inform. I was trying to put a screenshot in the chat, but it says I can't put messages in the chat because you're not a member of the chat. This Teams thing has been interesting today.
It doesn't like me for some reason. I don't know why.
We're all supposed to be kind of techie people, right? I think we could be better at this.
Man.
Yeah, some people are external. I'm not sure why, Brand.
Yeah. So, Brant, quick question about the lab piece. Do you have any sort of policy around when the lab reference ranges are updated according to those fields? Because if a patient identifies as female but is really male, how are you presenting that data? So that's one of our sticking points, is the lab is very caught up on how to present the information, and there's some questions on the pharmacy space too. I wasn't sure if you had any guidance on that, or if there's a lab analyst at your facility we could get in touch with.
Yes, I don't have it in that I can recall right off the top of my head, but I do remember us going through that, and I know who can give us that information. So
Okay.
if you want to send me an email and get a string started on that, I can get you
Okay.
in touch with our folks.
Great, thank you.
So I'm just looking back. We recently switched over to high sensitivity troponin. I don't know if anyone else is using that yet, but birth sex is important there on those first reference ranges. In discussion with our lab folks, if unknown is chosen, reference defaults to male ranges. So it looks like we're automatically pulling it. We do birth sex in our full reg, and we've added it as a requirement to quick reg in our EDs to make sure that that's accurately filled out. So I guess it is our registration folks that are filling that out initially.
Okay. Yeah, that's been a sticking point for us too. I think we're trying to get our team to think more holistically about, you know, capturing the information at any point that the patient presents versus really saying it's only clinical versus rev cycle, because I think, at least at our organization, you know, one could argue that there's really no difference in education level. Like, everyone's kind of starting from the same point. So if a patient is willing to share, not that they should have to ask, you know, registration should have to ask those questions, but if a patient's willing to share, we need to have a place to capture it. So it's definitely a emotionally charged conversation. A lot of opinions on it, so. Thank you.
Thanks for that one, Holly. Any other items folks want to bring up?
Actually, I have one more, Brian, but I don't want to dominate. So if nobody has, I'll wait till the end.
Sounds like you can go ahead.
Okay. Interested in your discharge process, and if anyone has done any recent work with making your discharge instructions more patient-friendly. We're having a lot of issues with our discharge power plans, providers entering 2 of them, the nurse not picking up on it, the discharge instructions being very lengthy. not being very patient friendly. So there's discussion we're looking at some of the illuminations that Cerner has out there, but our med lists and our patient instructions continue to be pretty lengthy. So I just was curious if anyone had any creative ideas on that, or if you've done any recent work with discharge.
So we don't have a tech solution on that necessarily, but we have recently, it started with COVID and kind of developed, started an admissions and discharges team. So we have a couple of devoted nurses. So they kind of help cut through some of that. All they do is discharges. So they know what they're looking for. They're very good at it. And then they sit down with the patients. And so, we may hand them a ream of paper, but they really get to the relevant bits and talk and do a lot of teach back demo. And that seems to be a pleaser both on our nurse side and our patient side.
Okay.
It's not the Cerner fix, but
Yeah.
it's helped with flow a lot. And then since they also help with the admissions, it's helped with staff buy-in, because you're not just coming and discharging and turning over that bed. You're going to come back in an hour and take that admission too. So that's helped with that as well.
Okay, great, thank you. How do you staff that? Just, sorry, real quick. Is it based on predictive admissions, discharges, or how do you staff that type of model?
They have it staffed Monday through Friday. I want to say it's like 9 to 6 or something, 9 to 6:30 maybe. And they've got 2 full-timers and I think 4 limbos. It's been we have a bunch of nurses who are nearing retirement who jumped on it. And so they come in, they teach, roll around and then head home.
Okay.
Pick up a couple days a week. When things aren't busy, I think that they'll kind of redeploy them into some other situations. They'll just go help here or there, maybe run down to the ED and do admissions histories if we're holding. But I think it's still very much in its infancy. Initially, they were staffing it with unit managers who were rotating through. We tried to do the discharge lounge approach where we brought them all down and cohorted them and did the teaching, but it was hard to get space for that. So now they have a couple cows and they roll all over.
Okay, great.
Do you guys use the dynamic documentation on the discharge workflow?
We don't. That's what I think the illumination that I just saw was on. We're not currently using that.
That was very helpful for us. There was a lot of pros and cons to dynamic documentations. One of the pros was to be able to remove all of the instructions that had been already previously given. That was a huge bonus because they were printing out at discharge 70 pages, things like that. If people didn't, X out the printer on the old workflow. So having that ability has helped a lot. The discharge med list that we created is very small and is not pleasing to the eye. That we get that is the biggest complaints. We'd like to make that larger, but it's hard to make that much larger because of the columns that are there that, go all the way across. But those were a couple of the things. Nobody likes our discharge process. Even though we think we keep optimizing it, we don't get much kudos or smiles. It still seems very time consuming to them and a lot of information. But the dynamic documentation definitely seemed to help a lot for us.
That's good to hear. I think the other issue we have is just ownership. So it's kind of everybody's problem, but nobody does it. So, we have multiple providers because our workflow is they put the discharge power plan and a plan state on admission so that multiple disciplines can add to it. But the problem with that is then the discharging provider doesn't look on the left-hand side to say, oh, there's already one there. They just add another one. So it's mainly on our hospitalist side that we're struggling. Orthopedics has a pretty rinse and repeat process. They have a lot of favorited plans and they don't want anything to change because basically they click a button and just the magic happens. So we're also trying to be mindful that we don't blow up the surgical process, which they're happy with, just to meet the needs of, you know, all the medical patients. So, but it's helpful to hear that the DynDoc process is improved that a little bit. Our med list, we also get complaints about, we don't currently have the next dose due fields because we had that originally and had some medication errors because of it with, like, patient comes in on a beta blocker that gets changed, it has conflicting inflammation for when the next dose is due, so we didn't feel comfortable leaving it out there, and that's something that I think people really want, because they're handwriting that in for the patient, so.
Yeah, when we deployed the new discharge workflow, we had removed that. And the nurses came back out and they were like, we're writing it in. We are telling them what to do. We want that to be there. So we entered that back in there. We had a lot of issues when we deployed it, when they were printing it, their names, every name of every nurse that cared for that patient showed up on the discharge summary. And when we were testing it, we did not see that. But when you're testing it, you don't have all these nurses that are on there. So we had to quickly go back and remove all their names. The nurse who was discharging it, their name was all over every single page. They didn't like that either. And I was like, well, it's on the signature page, but if you don't want it displayed. So we had to go back and do a lot of cleanup for that as well. To help.
Okay, that's good to know.
And we have our analyst that has done all the M-Page build for that. She's very good. She's really willing to share it as well. If you would ever want to me to connect you with Megan.
Yeah, that would be great. We have our first meeting next week just to kind of get from the group what they're looking for, because it was based off of a few, we call them ICARES, but reportable, reported events. So I think the discussion is going to start to happen next week around what they're looking for, and then making sure that if we move to that model, it's actually going to meet their needs. Because I think this is another one where it's not just the system, it's have we educated newer nurses how to discharge a patient? What are the things you need to go through? What's the process? So there's a lot to it, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, Holly, any more impossible workflows you want to bring up?
Nope.
Okay.
Oh, I won't bring up code status or one of the other fun. No.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm glad you bring those up. Those are important things to talk about, and I know a lot of others are dealing with the same things.
Our annual survey is coming up, so I'm sure in the next meeting I'll be asking for a lot.
Well, are there other questions folks want to bring up? I do. I know we've got a good group here today, but if you have other CNIOs or folks that you know at other organizations that you think would benefit from this, please let myself or Patty know, and we'll get them added to the next event. That way they can attend as well. This is one of these things, the more people we have, the more minds, the better. So if you know other CNIOs or clinical managers of clinical applications, those type of things that would benefit from this, please let me know and we'll get them added. Even though Brant thinks we're trying to lock him out, and everybody's still able to join this meeting. So our next meeting, January, February, will be in March. It'll be the first full week in March. I'm just looking here at my calendar. So we'll have that meeting March 8th. And so we'll get that invite out here by the end of the week. And that way people can plan for that as well. Any last minute items? All right, well, I think we covered some good things today with some of the vital vitals mapping, the gender, sex, and then some of the discharge processes. So I took some notes. I'll get that out and I'll try and make sure we've got the right connections for folks who are helping each other out as well. So I appreciate everybody joining and participating today. I think this was a great call. Thanks, everybody.
Happy
and,
New Year, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Happy
Happy
New
New
Year.
Year.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
My thing wasn't urgent.